Welcome back. Today we're going to have a look at how to plot geographical data in Veusz. That is, how can I take a map and overlay data over that map so that we can see the relationship of data to where it is in the world. And so let's just jump right in. What we need is geographical data. What I have here is a list of housing ages, total rooms, bedrooms, the population of a particular town, how many households there are in that town, what the median income of that town is, and what the median house value of that town is. And then I have those towns by longitude and latitude. And this is the secret to how we're going to plot things. Because really, if we think about plotting on a map, all we're doing is using the X, Y positions, the longitude and the latitude. And so what we need to do then is import this data, decide what it is that we want to show about this data, and then essentially put a map underneath it so that the data shows up in the right spot. So let's go ahead and do that. I have already put the data into Veusz. So here it is. We have the longitude and the latitude. What we want to do is plot houses where they appear, what the towns are like. I can go ahead and I can select longitude for the X and then latitude for the Y. And if you know your geography, this kind of looks a little bit like California already. Maybe it also looks a little bit like Mexico because of how this is skewed. And so you can see right away that maybe we're not going to want to have this particular aspect ratio, but let's worry about that in a moment after we figure out how to get the map underneath these points. These are the points associated with different places in California. The default for me makes it so that they're kind of hard to see, the default that I use, and so let's go ahead and just hide the outlines. We'll take the fill and let's make the fill something that we can see right now. I kind of like this purple that we use a lot in my group. And let's make these points small. Now I start to see the density of towns within California. Again, if you're not familiar with California, maybe you can't quite see it. And so what we really need is a map. In order to add in the map, we just want to use an image file. So we're going to use this widget. We're going to say add image file. Then I'm going to go to file name. If you're on a Mac, you might not be able to see the little dot that's over here where it says browse for file name, but you'll be able to see it for sure on a PC. That brings up a browser. And then I have already selected a map. A California map is a JPEG. I'll just double click to add it. It's put it here. I can't see it. It's too small. And so let's go ahead and say that the width that I want is 1. 1 in this case means the entire width of the plot. And the height that I want is also going to be 1. Now you can start to see that there is an image back behind here, although it's a little bit difficult to see. Also, you can see that like the borders aren't quite right. Part of this again stems from the fact that we have a page height and width that are different. So let's go ahead and make this bigger. Now I can see this. It doesn't quite align though, if you notice. So I'm going to go ahead and go to View, Zoom to Page. The cities, I have a bunch of cities that are kind of out in the ocean, and there's 2 reasons for this. One, the aspect ratio is still not quite right on this plot. 2, maybe this range isn't quite right for the map. And so if I want to put this data on the map correctly, what I really need to know is what are the bounds of this map? Where does this map start and where does this map end, both in terms of longitude and latitude? That's essentially specifying the X and Y limits, or the ranges over which we will have this data spread. So when you pull a map, you should make sure that that map has information about its geography, what the range of longitude and latitude is. And so for this map, I happen to know when I pulled it that it runs from minus 125 on the X to minus 113.4 on the Y. A little bit better, or sorry, on the X as well. And then when I think about the y-axis, we're going to run from 32.1 to 42.4. And when I do this, things will have improved just a little bit as well. But still it's not quite right, because what I'm saying, especially if I look at the x, that this should run from minus 125. That's the very edge of this x-axis. And that should be the edge of this image. So the problem is that I have set up this image, or the page, such that it's square. And because the page is square, this plot inside of here is square, in part because I have even margins on the left and the right. I need a different aspect ratio. And so something I could do is I could go in, I could change this left margin. Maybe I'd say like, oh, this needs to be 2 centimeters. And you can see it's a little bit closer, and I'd play around with this. But there's actually a much better way to do this. And I want to say one other thing too. Another way to solve this would be to go to the image file, and one of the options under here is to preserve the aspect ratio. And so what this means is that it's making sure that this is exactly how the image looked in terms of how tall and how wide it is. If I uncheck this box, it'll stretch it, and now everything fits just perfectly. But because it's a map, I've also distorted the way that California looks. And so rather than solving it this way, let's preserve the aspect ratio so that it's correct, but go back to our graph and change the aspect ratio so that it matches that of the image. And the easiest way to do that is to think about this range. I am going from minus 125 to minus 113.4, and this is a range that is roughly, this is a range that's roughly 11.6 difference between them. And here I'm going from 32.1 to 42.4, and that's a range of 10.3. So what I can do is I can go to the graph, and I can specify that the aspect ratio that I want is exactly 10.3 divided by 11.6. And when I do that, you'll see that it has enforced inside the canvas, where I have this outline of the canvas, that the plot itself has the aspect ratio that matches that of the map. And so now, no matter how I change the size of the canvas, it will maintain an aspect ratio that ensures that the data matches the plot and has not distorted it. Now that we have this, I actually don't know that the x and y axes carry too much information. So again, I'm just going to go in and I'm going to hide them. Now I have something that just looks like a plot with data on top of it. I can see the density of cities in California. It's sort of nice. Let's make this a little bit easier to work with. Let's make this a margin that is 0 all the way around, and that will spread out the plot as much as it can onto the canvas I've given it. It doesn't quite fill it all up, again, because the aspect ratio is not square and my canvas is square. But I think for right now, this is good enough. Let's go ahead and zoom to page. There's our page. Now, what can we do to improve the appearance of this? One, it's a little hard to see all this data still. So let's go back and rethink. Would this be better if it was 0.5 points? Yeah, maybe so. Or maybe what I could do is I could go in and I can change the transparency. Maybe this is 33% transparent or 66% transparent. And you start to get a sense of where the density really is. I'm going to change this back to 33. But something else that you might do is you might want to show some sort of behavior of this. Not only where are these, but what kind of properties that we might be interested in. And something that could be of interest to us is the median income, or maybe even the median house value. How much would it cost for me to buy a house in this country or in this particular city? And so what I could do is I could introduce a color map based off of these values here. Now, the way the color map works is a little strange in Veusz, so let's walk through how we should be doing this. Basically, if I want to introduce a color map, I would say use color map. And then I would also need to specify what this color map is going to be tied to. So I would go in here and let's say I wanted to know something about the median home value. How much is this going to cost me? I could click on this, everything disappears. And the reason is that I'm using this grayscale color map and that it starts at white. And as far as Veusz is currently concerned, we are just at the bottom of this particular color map. Let's not use a grayscale one though. Let's do this cool to warm map. Now what you can see is that we're starting at cold. It thinks everything is at the lowest possible value. If I click invert map, it would mean that the orange is the lowest possible value, and it still thinks everything's at the lowest possible value. And the reason for this is that the way the color map works is it really runs from 0 to 1. If I go back and I look at the data that I have though, you can see I have values that are gigantic. I mean, these are actually, none of them are even close to 1. None of them are below 1. And so what I would like to do is normalize this data. To do that, I would just divide it by the maximum. So let's just figure out what that is. I can say, what's the maximum of column I? And when we look at this, what we can see is that it's 500,001. If we wanted to make this a little bit easier to see, maybe we could go in and we could say that this is just currency. There we go. Now I can see that the value is 500,001. So then when I go in here, I should say, I want the highest value to be 500,001, so I would divide by 500,001. And when I do that, now you can see that I have this actual gradient. And I can invert it or not. Right now, as you might expect, the most expensive houses are kind of along the ocean near San Francisco, and so the inverted map is what we want to use. All right, so this is one way to do this. Something else that we could do is we could apply scale markers as well. For instance, maybe I wanted the things that were more expensive to look bigger. And so what I could do then is I could take this same thing and put it here. And now I'm going to scale the size of the markers by that amount. Maybe it's okay if they're 10 times bigger, so I'll just divide by 50,000 instead. And you can see now I have giant circles. I could go in, I could say I don't need the outline to be scaled, I don't need it to be hidden. Let's make this white. And now I have an outline on here. Let's make it a little bit thinner, 0.5. You know, where I start to have these large values. Maybe I don't want this to be divided by 50,000, but maybe 100,000. That'll make them a little bit smaller. And you can start playing around with this, right? Maybe I don't need this to be transparent anymore. Maybe now I can kind of see what's going on in that respect. Now for me, I'm not sure that I really like having these be so much bigger, so I would just get rid of this for right now and think about how we might change what we see here. Because they're not scaled up anymore, I also am not sure that I need to have this outline, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. This is back to the graph as we sort of have seen it before. Something that's kind of interesting is that sometimes the blue overwrites the red, sometimes the red overwrites the blue. This is because of the order of this. The median house value is not in any particular order. So if we wanted to, we could select all of this. We can go to data, we can go to sort, we can make sure we have that there's going to be a column, and then let's do median house value. Let's go smallest to largest. And now we're going to start at the cheapest houses, go to the most expensive houses, and when I go back and save this and then refresh, it'll make it so that it's drawn such that the most expensive houses are always on top, and it's easier to see the red. It's never being overwritten by any of the blue. Okay, what else might we do in this case? Something that could be nice to have is some kind of bar that indicates what the map for the coloring means. So to do that, we would add this widget, the color bar. Kind of like the color map, this thing's a little clunky to use, but that's okay. I don't want it at the bottom. I also don't want it underneath everything, so let's just go ahead and move it to the top so that I can see it. Let's go to the formatting. Let's say that what I would like it to do is maybe have a horizontal position that I can specify, a vertical position that I can specify, and then let's say that that horizontal manual position might want it to be on the right and up and down. So let's also make this color bar run vertical. Now let's move it on over. So how about horizontal? It's manual. We put it at 0.9. Let's see where that places it. You can see I actually kind of like this. It happens to be aligned on the legend here that tells me how long every particular, or the distance between points. So let's keep that. And then the vertical manual, let's move it down. So how about it's also at 0.9? Don't like that. How about 0.3, 0.1? Okay, that looks pretty good to me. We can also have a height and a width. So let's go ahead and just specify this the way we normally would. We had this page at 3 inches. So what about a 2-inch height? Pretty close to something that we could view, but I think we can play it safe and make it 1.8. We don't have a color in here yet. That's okay. In order to add the color, what we need to do is we need to tell it which widget we're coloring this based off of. Right now it has no idea that we're trying to color it to these points. So we'll go to widget and we'll say I want to color it to this XY widget. That's where our colored points are right now. And there you have it. Now it fills from 0 to 1. That's what I said. Our color scale always runs from 0 to 1. Now, again, this isn't really the scale that we have. We run from 0 to the maximum house price, which was 500,000. In order to adjust that, we can go here and say that the scale should be 500,000. And now we end up with 500,000. This isn't the format that I would like, so let's go ahead and actually change this around slightly. Let's use this formatting. Let's say that we don't want any decimal places. Let's put a $sign out in front. To me, this is a little hard to read. I don't really think we need the hundreds of thousands. Maybe we could just represent this in terms of thousands. And so what we would have instead is that we scale this by 500, and then we put a K at the end so that it becomes 500,000. Now we're starting to see that this encroaches ever so slightly, and so I would go back, I would change this just a little bit. So how about the vertical manual is 1.1. That looks pretty good, except maybe we're going to want to have a title at the top that explains to us that this is the median house price. So let's go ahead and add a label, median house price. We will make this visible by moving it up, and then I'm going to worry about the alignment. I think that looks pretty good. I'll probably move this over just a little bit so that it's aligned. This is probably about where I would like this to be. So let's go here. I can see that the sizes are different. Let's go ahead and change the size of the title and also the size of the tick marks. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's move this horizontal alignment over just a little bit. And then this again down. That looks pretty good. And then we're just going to adjust the height again so it fits. That looks pretty good. Now I don't particularly like that these are all black. It overlaps a lot with the map, so let's just do a few things real quick to solve that. We don't need so many tick marks in my opinion, so let's get rid of those. We don't need to see the axis. Let's get rid of that. We don't need to have the box around this, so let's go ahead and get rid of the outline on this particular bar. What we're left with is just these tick marks, the major tick marks. And they don't quite stretch the whole way across, so let's make them a little bit bigger. 10 point, that's just about right. It might be more like 11. They're too long, but I think actually that's going to be okay because I also do not like that they are black. And so I'm going to change these white. I don't like that it sort of breaks up this so strongly, so I'm also going to make this transparent. How about 33% transparent? 66%. Now we have a subtle indication of where each one of these values might lie. To me, this looks pretty good, like a map. There's a few other things I might want to point out right now, so let's go ahead and handle that. Let's think about this XY axis widget just a little bit and how the color maps work. We have so many color maps to choose from. You can see, like, I can pick this complementary one. I don't think it looks good. We'll have talked about this on the channel and other places, how to choose maps. I think this warm blue works pretty good, but another thing that could be good is blue dark red. All right, in this case, if I swap this out, I get blue to red. This runs smoothly, but there are also options where you could have it stepped. And so we could go blue, dark red, step 12, and you'll see that there are discrete lines. But now these run in between these lines. And so one way to solve that is to go back to the color bar, go to the tick marks and say, instead of 6, maybe I just want 4 of these things. And then now every 3 one of these color chunks, I will have a new line that divides it up. They'll fall exactly on those color chunks, and that also looks pretty good. I think, you know, if I'm thinking about having these discrete values or having something that is running in a smooth gradient, in this particular case, I might run it in a smooth gradient because I don't like the separations between each of these values. And so for me, I would go back, I would go into here, I would choose my color map, I would have the color map go blue to dark red, and then I would go back to the color bar and I would send this back to 6 or maybe just 3, something like that. I don't know. You can play around with how many divisions you think are worth it. And yeah, it looks okay. It's a little hard to see these lines now. And so again, I might go in if I were trying to make this look beautiful and change this back to 66 or something like that, where it's more apparent where these dividing lines are. But at this point, I think it's a pretty nice chart. And what we could do is then just export it, make sure that we're at a high enough DPI so it looks good, and then we're done. And so with that, hopefully you've enjoyed learning how to make a map. The process is a little involved, but at the end you can make something that looks quite nice in views and represent geographical relationships between data points.